Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with a Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll provide the seventh and last installation into our series on the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So if you haven't gone back and watched 1 through 6, I would highly encourage you to do so because understanding the true beliefs, the intentions, and purpose of one of the most notorious figures in U.S. history is going to really help you understand if his ideas, which are lauded by many historians and legal scholars, should be lauded or if they should be disregarded. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Like I said, we're going on to number 7. This one took place in Alton, October 15th, 1858. And since Mr. Lincoln started the last debate, Senator Douglas will start this one. Judge Douglas will start this one. And he says this: "Ladies and gentlemen, it is now nearly 4 months since the canvass between Mr. Lincoln and myself commenced. I hold that there is no power on earth under our system of government which has the right to force a constitution upon an unwilling people. Most of the men who denounced my course on the Lecompton question objected to it, not because I was not right, but because they thought it expedient at that time for the sake of keeping the party together to do wrong. But I am told that I would have been all right if I had voted for the English bill after the Lecompton measure was killed. You know a pardon was granted to all political offenders on the Lecompton question, provided they would only vote for the English bill. I did not accept the benefits of that pardon for the reason that I had been right in the course I had pursued, and hence did not require any forgiveness. Let us see how the result has been worked out. English brought in this bill referring the Lecompton Constitution back to the people, with the provision that if it was rejected, Kansas should be kept out of the Union until she had the full ratio of population required for a member of Congress, thus in effect declaring that if the people of Kansas would only consent to come into the Union under the Lecompton Constitution and have a slave state when they did not want it, they should be admitted with a population of 35,000, but that if they were so obstinate as to insist upon having just such a constitution as they thought best, and to desire admission as a free state, then they should be kept out until they had 93,420 inhabitants. I then said, and I now repeat to you, that whenever Kansas has people enough for a slave state, she has people enough for a free state. I was and am willing to adopt the rule that no state shall ever come into the Union until she has the full ratio of population for a member of Congress, provided that rule is made uniform. Fellow citizens, how have the supporters of the English bill stood up to their pledges not to admit Kansas until she obtained a population of 93,420 in the event she rejected the Lecompton Constitution? How? The newspapers inform us that English himself, whilst conducting his canvass for re-election, and in order to secure it, pledged himself to his constituents that if returned, he would disregard his own bill and vote to admit Kansas into the Union with such population as she might have when she made application. We are informed that every Democratic candidate for Congress in all the states where elections have recently been held was pledged against the English bill, with perhaps 1 or 2 exceptions. Now, if I had only done as these anti-Lecompton men who voted for the English bill in Congress, pledging themselves to refuse to admit Kansas if she refused to become a slave state until she had a population of 93,420, and then returned to their people, forfeited their pledge, and made a new pledge to admit Kansas at any time she applied, without regard to population, I would have had no trouble. You saw the whole power and patronage of the federal government wielded in Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania to re-elect anti-Lecompton men to Congress who voted against Lecompton, then vetoed for the English bill, and then denounced the English bill and pledged themselves to their people to disregard it. My sin consists in not having given a pledge and then in not having afterward forfeited it. For that reason, in this state, every postmaster, every route agent, every collector of the ports, and every federal office holder forfeits his head the moment he expresses a preference for the Democratic candidates against Lincoln and his abolition associates. A Democratic administration, which we helped to bring into power, deems it consistent with its fidelity to principle and its regard to duty to wield its power in this state on behalf of the Republican abolition candidates in every county and every congressional district against the Democratic Party. All I have to say in reference to the matter is that if that administration have not regard enough for principle, if they are not sufficiently attached to the creed of the Democratic Party, to bury forever their personal hostilities in order to succeed in carrying out our glorious principles, I have. I have no personal difficulty with Mr. Buchanan or his cabinet. He chose to make certain recommendations to Congress, as he had a right to do, on the Lecompton question. I could not vote in favor of them. I had as much right to judge for myself how I should vote as he had how he should recommend. He undertook to say to me, quote, "If you do not vote as I tell you, I will take off the heads of your friends." I replied to him, quote, "You did not elect me. I represent Illinois, and I am accountable to Illinois as my constituency and to God, but not to the president or to any other power on earth." And now this warfare is made on me because I would not surrender my convictions of duty, because I would not abandon my constituency and receive the orders of the executive authorities how I should vote in the Senate of the United States. I hold that an attempt to control the Senate on the part of the executive is subversive of the principles of our Constitution. The executive department is independent of the Senate, and the Senate is independent of the President. In matters of legislation, the President has a veto on the action of the Senate, and in appointments and treaties, the Senate has a veto on the President. He has no more right to tell me how I shall vote on his appointments than I have to tell him whether he shall veto or approve a bill that the Senate has passed. Whenever you recognize the right of the executive to say a senator, quote, "Do this or I will take off the heads of your friends," you convert this government from a republic into a despotism. Whenever you recognize the right of a president to say to a member of Congress, quote, "Vote as I tell you or I will bring a power to bear against you at home which will crush you," you destroy the independence of the representative and convert him into a tool of the executive power. I resisted this invasion of the constitutional rights of a senator, and I intend to resist it as long as I have a voice to speak or vote to give. Yet Mr. Buchanan cannot provoke me to abandon one iota of democratic principles out of revenge or hostility to his course. I stand by the platform of the Democratic Party and by its organization and support its nominees. If there are any who choose to bolt, the fact only shows that they are not as good Democrats as I am. I hold that this government was established on the white basis. It was established by white men for the benefit of white men and their posterity forever, and should be administered by white men and none others. White men, not man. White men and none others. But it does not follow by any means that merely because the Negro is not a citizen, and merely because he is not our equal, that therefore he should be a slave. On the contrary, it does follow that we ought to extend to the Negro race and to all other dependent races all the rights, all the privileges, and all the immunities which they can exercise consistently with the safety of society. Humanity requires that we should give them all these privileges. Christianity commands that we should extend those privileges to them. The question then arises, what are those privileges, and what is the nature and extent of them? My answer is that that is a question which each state must answer for itself. If the people of all the states will act on that great principle, and each state mind its own business, attend to its own affairs, take care of its own Negroes, and not meddle with its neighbors, then there will be peace between the North and South, the East and the West, throughout the whole Union. Why can we not thus have peace? Why should we thus allow a sectional party to agitate this country, to array the North against the South, and convert us into enemies instead of friends, merely that a few ambitious men may ride into power on a sectional hobby? How long is it since these ambitious Northern men wished for a sectional organization? Did any one of them dream of a sectional party as long as the North was the weaker section and the South the stronger? Then all were opposed to sectional parties, but the moment the North obtained the majority in the South and Senate by the admission of California and could elect a president without the aid of Southern votes, that moment ambitious Northern men formed a scheme to excite the North against the South and make the people be governed in their votes by geographical lines, thinking that the North, being the stronger section, would outvote the South, and consequently they, the leaders, would ride into office on a sectional hobby. I am told that my hour is out. It was very short. So here is Mr. Lincoln's reply. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have been somewhat in my own mind complimented by a large portion of Judge Douglas's speech. I mean that portion which he devotes to the controversy between himself and the present administration. This is the 7th time Judge Douglas and myself have met in these joint discussions, and he has been gradually improvising, improving. Goodness gracious, let me try it again. And he has been gradually improving in regard to his war with the administration. At Quincy, day before yesterday, he was a little more severe upon the administration than I had heard him upon any occasion, and I took pains to compliment him for it. I then told him to, quote, give it to them with all the power he had, and as some of them were present, I told them I would be very much obliged if they would give it to him in about the same way. I take it he has now vastly improved upon the attack he made then upon the administration. I flatter myself he has really taken my advice on this subject. All I can say now is to recommend to him and to them what I then commended, to prosecute the war against one another in the most vigorous manner. I say to them again, go it, husband, go it, bear. You have heard him frequently allude to my controversy with him in regard to the Declaration of Independence. At Galesburg the other day, I said in answer to Judge Douglas that 3 years ago there never had been a man, so far as I knew or believed, in the whole world who had said that the Declaration of Independence did not include Negroes in the term all men. I reassert it today. I assert that Judge Douglas and all his friends may search the whole records of the country, and it will be a matter of great astonishment to me if they shall be able to find that one human being 3 years ago had ever uttered the astounding sentiment that the term all men in the Declaration did not include the Negro. Do not let me be misunderstood. I know that more than 3 years ago, there were men who, finding this assertion constantly in the way of their schemes to bring about the ascendancy and perpetuation of slavery, denied the truth of it. I know that Mr. Calhoun and all the politicians of his school denied the truth of the Declaration. I know that it ran along in the mouth of some Southern men for a period of years, ending at last in the shameful, though rather forcible declaration of Petit of Indiana, upon the floor of the United States Senate, that the Declaration of Independence was in that respect a self-evident lie, rather than a self-evident truth. But I say with a perfect knowledge of all this hawking at the Declaration, without directly attacking it, that 3 years ago there never had lived a man who had ventured to assail it in the sneaking way of pretending to believe it, and then asserting it did not include the Negro. I believe the first man who ever said it was Chief Justice Taney in the Dred Scott case, and the next to him was our friend Stephen A. Douglas. And now it has become the catchword of the entire party. And when this new principle, this new proposition that no human being ever thought of 3 years ago, is brought forward, I combat it as having an evil tendency, if not an evil design. I combat it as having a tendency to dehumanize the Negro, to take away from him the right of ever striving to be a man. I combat it as being one of the 1,000 things constantly done in these days to prepare the public mind to make property, and nothing but property, of the Negro in all the states of this Union. Judge Douglas has again referred to a Springfield speech in which I said, quote, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." The judge has so often made the entire quotation from that speech that I can make it from memory. I used this language. We are now far into the 5th year since a policy was initiated with the avowed object and confident promise of putting an end to the slavery agitation. Under the operation of this policy, that agitation had not only not ceased, but has constantly augmented. In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. Quote, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward till it shall become alike lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. That extract and the sentiments expressed in it have been extremely offensive to Judge Douglas. He has warred upon them as Satan wars upon the Bible. His perversions upon it are endless. Here now are my views upon it in brief. I said we were now far into the 5th year since the policy was initiated with the avowed object and confident promise of putting an end to the slavery agitation. Is it not so? When that Nebraska bill was brought forward 4 years ago, last January, was it not for the avowed object of putting an end to the slavery agitation? We were to have no more agitation in Congress. It was all to be banished to the territories. By the way, I will remark here that, as Judge Douglas is very fond of complimenting Mr. Crittenden in these days, Mr. Crittenden has said there was a falsehood in that whole business, for there was no slavery agitation at that time to allay. We were for a little while quiet on the troublesome thing, and that very allaying plaster of Judge Douglas's stirred it up again. But was it not understood or intimated with the, quote, confident promise of putting an end to the slavery agitation? Surely it was. In every speech you heard Judge Douglas make until he got into this imbroglio, as they call it, with the administration about the Lecompton Constitution, Every speech on that Nebraska bill was full of his felicitation that we were just at the end of the slavery agitation. The last tip of the last joint of the old serpent's tail was just drawing out of view. But has it proved so? I have asserted that under that policy, that agitation, quote, has not only not ceased, but has constantly augmented. When was there ever a greater agitation in Congress than that last winter? When was it as great in the country as today? It was a collateral object in the introduction of that Nebraska policy, which was to clothe the people of the territories with a superior degree of self-government beyond what they had ever had before. The first object, and the main one, of conferring upon the people a higher degree of, quote, self-government is a question of fact to be determined by you in answer to a single question. Have you ever heard or known of a people anywhere on earth who had as little to do as, in the first instance of its use, the people of Kansas had with this same right of self-government? In its main policy and in its collateral object, it has been nothing but a living, creeping lie from the time of its introduction till today. I have intimated that I thought the agitation would not cease until a crisis should have been reached and passed. I have stated in what way I thought it would be reached and passed. I have said that it might go one way or the other. We might, by arresting the further spread of it and placing it where the fathers originally placed it, put it where the public mind should rest in the belief that it was in the course of ultimate extinction. Thus the agitation may cease. It may be pushed forward until it shall become alike lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. I have said, and I repeat, my wish is that the further spread of it may be arrested, and that it may be placed where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction. I have expressed that as my wish. I entertain the opinion, upon evidence sufficient to my mind, that the fathers of this government placed that institution where the public mind did rest in the belief that it was in the course of ultimate extinction. Let me ask why they made provision that the source of slavery, the African slave trade, should be cut off at the end of 20 years. Why did they make provision that in all the new territory we owned at that time, slavery should be forever inhibited? Why stop its spread in one direction and cut off its source in another, if they did not look to its being placed in the course of ultimate extinction? Again, the institution of slavery is only mentioned in the Constitution of the United States 2 or 3 times, and in neither of these cases does the word slavery or Negro race occur. But covert language is used each time, and for a purpose full of significance. What is the language in regard to the prohibition of the African slave trade? It runs in about this way. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808. The next allusion in the Constitution to the question of slavery and the black race is on the subject of the basis of representation, and there the language used is this. He doesn't say this, he just says used is. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. It says persons, not slaves, not Negroes. But this 3/5 can be applied to no other class among us than the Negroes. Lastly, in the provision for the reclamation of fugitive slaves, it is said, no person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. There again, there is no mention of the word Negro or of slavery. In all 3 of these places, being the only allusions to slavery in the instrument, covert language is used. Language is used not suggesting that slavery existed or that the black race were among us. And I understand the contemporaneous history of those times to be that covert language was used with a purpose, and that purpose was that in our Constitution, which it was hoped and is still hoped will endure forever, when it should be read by intelligent and patriotic men after the institution of slavery had passed from among us, there should be nothing on the face of the great charter of liberty suggesting that such a thing as Negro slavery had ever existed among us. This is part of the evidence that the fathers of the government expected and intended the institution of slavery to come to an end. They expected and intended that it should be in the course of ultimate extinction. And when I say that I desire to see the further spread of it arrested, I only say I desire to see that done which the fathers have first done. When I say I desire to see it placed where the public mind will rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction, I only say I desire to see it placed where they placed it. It is not true that our fathers, as Judge Douglas assumes, made this government part slave and part free. Understand the sense in which he puts it. He assumes that slavery is a rightful thing within itself, was introduced by the framers of the Constitution. The exact truth is that they found the institution existing among themselves, and they left it as they found it. But in making the government, they left this institution with many clear marks of disapprobation upon it. They found slavery among them, and they left it among them because of the difficulty, the absolute impossibility, of its immediate removal. And when Judge Douglas asks me why he cannot let it remain part slave and part free, as the fathers of the government made it, he asks the question based upon an assumption which is itself a falsehood. And I turn upon him and ask him the question, when the policy that the fathers of the government had adopted in relation to this element among us was the best policy in the world, the only wise policy, the only policy that we can ever safely continue upon, that will ever give us peace, unless this dangerous element masters us all and becomes a national institution. I turn upon him and ask him why he could not leave it alone. I turn and ask him why he was driven to the necessity of introducing a new policy in regard to it. He has himself said he introduced a new policy. He said so in his speech on the 22nd of March of the present year, 1858. I ask him why he could not let it remain where our fathers placed it. I ask, too, of Judge Douglas and his friends why we shall not again place this institution upon the basis on which the fathers left it. I ask you, when he infers that I am in favor of setting the free and slave states at war, when the institution was placed in that attitude by those who made the Constitution, did they not make any war? If we had no war out of it when thus placed, wherein is the ground of belief that we shall have war out of it if we return to that policy? Have we had any peace upon this matter springing from any other basis? I maintain that we have not. I have proposed nothing more than a return to the policy of the fathers. I confess when I propose a certain measure of policy, it is not enough for me that I do not intend anything evil in the result, but it is incumbent on me to show that it has not a tendency to that result. I have met Judge Douglas in that point of view. I have not only made the declaration that I do not mean to produce a conflict between the states, but I have tried to show by fair reasoning, and I think I have shown to the minds of fair men, that I propose nothing but what has a most peaceful tendency. The quotation that I happened to make in that Springfield speech that, quote, a house divided against itself cannot stand, and which has proved so offensive to the judge, was part and parcel of the same thing. He tries to show that variety in the domestic institutions of the different states is necessary and indispensable. I do not dispute it. I have no controversy with Judge Douglas about that. I shall very readily agree with him that it would be foolish for us to insist upon having a cranberry law here in Illinois where we have no cranberries, because they have a cranberry law in Indiana, where they do have cranberries. I should insist that it would be exceedingly wrong in us to deny to Virginia the right to enact oyster laws where they have oysters, because we want no such laws here. I understand. I hope, quite as well as Judge Douglas or anybody else, that the variety in the soil and climate and face of the country, and consequent variety in the industrial pursuits and productions of a country, require systems of law conforming to this variety and the natural features of the country. I understand quite as well as Judge Douglas that if we here raise a barrel of flour more than we want, and the Louisianians raise a barrel of sugar more than they want, it is of mutual advantage to exchange. That produces commerce, brings us together, and makes us better friends. We like one another the more for it. And I understand as well as Judge Douglas or anybody else that these mutual accommodations are the cements which bind together the different parts of this union, that instead of being a thing to divide the house, figuratively expressing the union, they tend to sustain it. They are the props of the house, tending always to hold it up. But when I have admitted all this, I ask if there is any parallel between these things and this institution of slavery. I do not see that there is any parallel at all between them. Consider it. When have we had any difficulty or quarrel amongst ourselves about the cranberry laws of Indiana, or the oyster laws of Virginia, or the pine lumber laws of Maine, or the fact that Louisiana produces sugar and Illinois flour? When have we had any quarrels over these things? When have we had perfect peace in regard to this thing, which I say is an element of discord in this union? We have sometimes had peace, but when was it? It was when the institution of slavery remained quiet where it was. We have had difficulty and turmoil whenever it has made a struggle to spread itself where it was not. I ask then if experience does not speak in thunder tones, telling us that the policy which has given peace to the country heretofore, being returned to, gives the greatest promise of peace again. You may say, and Judge Douglas has intimated the same thing, that all this difficulty in regard to the institution of slavery is the mere agitation of office seekers and ambitious northern politicians. He thinks we want to get his place, I suppose. I agree that there are office seekers amongst us. The Bible says somewhere that we are desperately selfish. I think we would have discovered that fact without the Bible. I do not claim that I am any less so than the average of men, but I do claim that I am not more selfish than Judge Douglas. But is it true that all the difficulty and agitation we have in regard to this institution of slavery springs from office seeking, from the mere ambition of politicians? Is that the truth? How many times have we had danger from this question? Go back to the day of the Missouri Compromise. Go back to the nullification question, at the bottom of which lay this same slavery question. Go back to the time of the annexation of Texas. Go back to the troubles that led to the Compromise of 1850. You will find that every time, with the single exception of the nullification question, they sprung from an endeavor to spread this institution. There never was a party in the history of this country, and there probably never will be, of sufficient strength to disturb the general peace of the country. Parties themselves may be divided and quarrel on minor questions, yet it extends not beyond the parties themselves. But does not this question make a disturbance outside of political circles? Does it not enter into the churches and rend them asunder? What divided the great Methodist Church into two parts, north and south? What has raised this constant disturbance in every Presbyterian General Assembly that meets? What disturbed the Unitarian Church in this very city 2 years ago? What has jarred and shaken the great American Tract Society recently, not yet splitting it, but sure to divide it in the end? Is it not this same mighty, deep-seated power that somehow operates on the minds of men, exciting and stirring them up in every avenue of society, in politics, in religion, literature, in morals, in all the manifold relations of life? Is this the work of politicians? Is that irresistible power which for 50 years has shaken the government and agitated the people to be stilled and subdued by pretending that it is an exceedingly simple thing and we ought not to talk about it? If you will get everybody else to stop talking about it, I assure you I will quit before they have half done so. But where is the philosophy or statesmanship which assumes that you can quiet that disturbing element in our society which has disturbed us for more than half a century, which has been the only serious danger that has threatened our institutions? I say, where is the philosophy or the statesmanship based on the assumption that we are to quit talking about it, and that the public mind is all at once to cease being agitated by it? Yet this is the policy here in the North that Douglas is advocating, that we are to care nothing about it. I ask you if it is not a false philosophy. Is it not a false statesmanship that undertakes to build up a system of policy upon the basis of caring nothing about the very thing that everybody does care the most about? The thing which all experience has shown we care a very great deal about. The judge alludes very often in the course of his remarks to the exclusive right which the states have to decide the whole thing for themselves. I agree with him very readily that the different states have that right. What I insist upon is that the new territories shall be kept free from it while in the territorial condition. Judge Douglas assumes that we have no interest in them, that we have no right whatever to interfere. I think we have some interest. I think that as white men we have. Do we not wish for an outlet for our surplus population, if I may so express myself? Do we not feel an interest in getting to that outlet with such institutions as we would like to have prevail there? If you go to a territory opposed to slavery and another man comes upon the same ground with his slave, upon the assumption that the things are equal, it turns out that he has the equal right all his way, and you have no part of it your way. If he goes in and makes it a slave territory, and by consequence a slave state, is it not time that those who desire to have it a free state were on equal ground? Let me suggest it in a different way. How many Democrats are there about here? Someone heckles 1,000. Who have left slave states and come into the free state of Illinois to get rid of the institution of slavery. Someone else heckles. Another voice, 1,001. I reckon there are 1,001. I will ask you, if the policy you are now advocating had prevailed when this country was in a territorial condition, where would you have gone to get rid of it? Where would you have found your free state or territory to go to? And when hereafter, for any cause, the people in this place shall desire to find new homes, if they wish to be rid of the institution, where will they find the place to go to? Now, irrespective of the moral aspect of this question as to whether there is a right or wrong in enslaving a Negro, I am still in favor of our new territories being in such a condition that white men may find a home, may find some spot where they can better their condition, where they can settle upon new soil and better their condition in life. I am in favor of this, not merely, I must say it here as I have elsewhere, for our own people who are born amongst us, but as an outlet for free white people everywhere, the world over, in which Hans and Baptists and Patrick and all other men from all the world may find new homes and better their conditions in life. I understand I have 10 minutes yet. I will employ it in saying something about this argument Judge Douglas uses while he sustains the Dred Scott decision that the people of the territories can still somehow exclude slavery. The first thing I ask attention to is the fact that Judge Douglas constantly said before the decision that whether they could or not was a question for the Supreme Court. But after the court has made the decision, he virtually says it is not a question for the Supreme Court, but for the people. And how is it he tells us they can exclude it? He says it needs police regulations, and that it admits of unfriendly legislation. Although it is a right established by the Constitution of the United States to take a slave into a territory of the United States and hold him as property, yet unless the territorial legislature will give unfriendly legislation, and more especially if they adopt unfriendly legislation, they can practically exclude him. Now, without meeting this proposition as a matter of fact, I pass to consider the real constitutional obligation. Let me take the gentleman who looks me in the face before me, and let us suppose that he is a member of the territorial legislature. The first thing he will do will be to swear that he will support the Constitution of the United States. His neighbor by his side will support the Constitution. I was going to reread that line. His neighbor by his side enjoy. And I skipped a line. Good grief. Let me try another time. His neighbor by his side in the territory has slaves and needs territorial legislation to enable him to enjoy that constitutional right. Can he withhold the legislation which his neighbor needs for the enjoyment of a right which is fixed in his favor in the Constitution of the United States, which he has sworn to support? Can he withhold it without violating his oath? And, more especially, can he pass unfriendly legislation to violate his oath? Why, this is a monstrous sort of talk about the Constitution of the United States. There has never been as outlandish or lawless a doctrine from the mouth of any respectable man on earth. I do not believe it is a constitutional right to hold slaves in a territory of the United States. I believe the decision was improperly made. I go for revising it. Judge Douglas is furious against those who go for reversing a decision, but he is for legislating it out of all force while the law itself stands. I repeat that there has never been so monstrous a doctrine uttered from the mouth of a respectable man. I suppose most of us, I know it of myself, believe that the people of the southern states are entitled to a congressional fugitive slave law. That is a right fixed in the Constitution. But it cannot be made available to them without congressional legislation. In the judge's language, it is a, quote, barren right, which needs legislation before it can become efficient and valuable to the persons to whom it is guaranteed. And as the right is constitutional, I agree that the legislation shall be granted to it, and that not that we like the institution of slavery. We profess we have no taste for running and catching niggers. But wait, Abraham Lincoln loved black people, right? Sorry to disappoint. Back to Lincoln. At least I profess no taste for that job at all. Why then do I yield support to a fugitive slave law? Because I do not understand that the Constitution which guarantees that right can be supported without it. And if I believe that the right to hold a slave in a territory was equally fixed in the Constitution with the right to reclaim fugitives, I should be bound to give it the legislation necessary to support it. I say that no man can deny his obligation to give the necessary legislation to support slavery in a territory who believes it is a constitutional right to have it there. No man can, who does not give the abolitionists an argument to deny the obligation enjoined by the Constitution to enact a fugitive slave law. Try it now. It is the strongest abolition argument ever made. I say, if that Dred Scott decision is correct, then the right to hold slaves in a territory is equally a constitutional right with the right of a slaveholder to have his runaway returned. No one can show the distinction between them. One is express so that we cannot deny it. The other is construed to be in the Constitution so that he who believes the decision to be correct believes in the right. The man who argues that by unfriendly legislation, in spite of that constitutional right, slavery may be driven from the territories, cannot avoid furnishing an argument by which abolitionists may deny the obligation to return fugitives and claim the power to pass laws unfriendly to the right of the slaveholder to reclaim his fugitives. To his fugitive, singular, not plural. I do not know how such an argument may strike a popular assembly like this, but I defy anybody to go before a body of men whose minds are educated to estimating evidence and reasoning, and show that there is an iota of difference between the constitutional right to reclaim a fugitive and the constitutional right to hold a slave in a territory, provided this Dred Scott decision is correct. I defy any man to make an argument that will justify unfriendly legislation to deprive a slaveholder of his right to hold his slave in a territory that will not equally, in all its length, breadth, and thickness, furnish an argument for nullifying the fugitive slave law. Why, there is not such an abolitionist in the nation as Douglas, after all. So now Mr. Douglas's reply. This is the final speech for these debates between Mr. Lincoln and Mr. Douglas. He says this. Mr. Lincoln has concluded his remarks by saying that there is not such an abolitionist as I am in all America. If he could make the abolitionists of Illinois believe that, he would not have much show for the Senate. Let him make the abolitionists believe the truth of that statement, and his political back is broken. His first criticism upon me is the expression of his hope that the war of the administration will be prosecuted against me and the Democratic Party of this state with vigor. He wants that war prosecuted with vigor. I have no doubt of it. His hopes of success and the hopes of his party depend solely upon it. They have no chance of destroying the democracy of this state except by the aid of federal patronage. He has all the federal office holders here as his allies running separate tickets against the democracy to divide the party. Although the leaders all intend to vote directly the abolition ticket and only leave the greenhorns to vote this separate ticket who refuse to go into the abolition camp. There is something really refreshing in the thought that Mr. Lincoln is in favor of prosecuting one war vigorously. It is the first war I ever knew him to be in favor of prosecuting. It is the first war I ever knew him to believe to be just or constitutional. When the Mexican War was being waged and the American army was surrounded by the enemy in Mexico, he thought that war was unconstitutional, unnecessary, and unjust. He thought it was not commenced on the right spot. When I made an incidental allusion of that kind in the joint discussion over at Charleston some weeks ago, Lincoln, in replying, said that I, Douglas, had charged him with voting against supplies for the Mexican War, and then reared up full length and swore that he never voted against the supplies. That it was a slander, and caught hold of Ficklin, who sat on the stand and said, quote, "Here, Ficklin, tell the people that it is a lie." Well, Ficklin, who had served in Congress with him, stood up and told them all that he recollected about it. It was that when George Ashmun of Massachusetts brought forward a resolution declaring the war unconstitutional, unnecessary, and unjust, that Lincoln had voted for it. Yes, said Lincoln, I did. Thus he confessed that he voted that the war was wrong, that our country was in the wrong, and consequently that the Mexicans were in the right, but charged that I had slandered him by saying that he voted against the supplies. I never charged him with voting against the supplies in my life because I knew that he was not in Congress when they were voted. The war was commenced on the 13th day of May, 1846, and on that day we appropriated in Congress $10 millions and 50,000 men to prosecute it. During the same session, we voted more men and more money, and at the next session we voted more men and more money, so that by the time Mr. Lincoln entered Congress, we had enough men and enough money to carry on the war, and had no occasion to vote for any more. When he got into the House, being opposed to the war, and not being able to stop the supplies because they had all gone forward, all he could do was to follow the lead of Corwin, and prove that the war was not begun on the right spot, and that it was unconstitutional, unnecessary, and wrong. Remember, too, that this he did after the war had been begun. It is one thing to be opposed to the declaration of a war, another and very different thing to take sides with the enemy against your own country after the war has been commenced. Our army was in Mexico at the time. Many battles had been fought. Our citizens, who were defending the honor of their country's flag, were surrounded by the daggers, the guns, and the poison of the enemy. Then it was that Calhoun made his speech in which he declared that the American soldiers ought to be welcomed by the Mexicans with bloody hands to hospitable graves. Then it was that Ashmun and Lincoln voted in the House of Representatives that the war was unconstitutional and unjust. In Ashmun's resolution, Calhoun's speech, and Lincoln's vote were sent to Mexico and read at the head of the Mexican army to prove to them that there was a Mexican party in the Congress of the United States who were doing all in their power to aid them. That a man takes sides with the common enemy against his own country in time of war should rejoice, and a war being made on me now is very natural. And in my opinion, no other kind of man would rejoice in it. Mr. Lincoln told you that the slavery question was the only thing that ever disturbed the peace and harmony of the Union. Did not nullification once raise its head and disturb the peace of this Union in 1832? Was that the slavery question, Mr. Lincoln? Did not disunion raise its monster head during the last war with Great Britain? Was that the slavery question, Mr. Lincoln? The peace of this country has been disturbed 3 times, once during the war with Great Britain, once on the tariff question, and once on the slavery question. His argument, therefore, that slavery is the only question that has ever created dissension in the Union falls to the ground. It is true that agitators are enabled now to use this slavery question for the purpose of sectional strife. He admits that in regard to all things else, the principle that I advocate, making each state and territory free to decide for itself, ought to prevail. He instances the cranberry laws and the oyster laws, and he might have gone through the whole list with the same effect. I say that all these laws are local and domestic, and that local and domestic concerns should be left to each state and each territory to manage for itself. If agitators would acquiesce in that principle, there never would be any danger to the peace and harmony of the Union. Mr. Lincoln tries to avoid the main issue by attacking the truth of my proposition that our fathers made this government divided into free and slave states, recognizing the right of each to decide all its local questions for itself. Did they not thus make it? It is true that they did not establish slavery in any of the states or abolish it in any of them, but finding 13 states, 12 of which were slave and 1 free, they agreed to form a government uniting them together as they stood, divided into free and slave states, and to guarantee forever to each state the right to do as it pleased on the slavery question. Having thus made the government, and conferred this right upon each state forever, I assert that this government can exist as they made it, divided into free and slave states, if any one state chooses to retain slavery. He says that he looks forward to a time when slavery shall be abolished everywhere. I look forward to a time when each state shall be allowed to do as it pleases. If it chooses to keep slavery forever, it is not my business, but its own. If it chooses to abolish slavery, it is its own business, not mine. I care more for the great principle of self-government, the right of the people to rule, than I do for all the Negroes in Christendom. I would not endanger the perpetuity of this Union. I would not blot out the great inalienable rights of the white men for all the Negroes that ever existed. Hence, I say, let us maintain this government on the principles that our fathers made it, recognizing the right of each state to keep slavery as long as its people determine, or to abolish it when they please. But Mr. Lincoln says that when our fathers made this government, they did not look forward to the state of things now existing, and therefore he thinks the doctrine was wrong. And he quotes Brooks of South Carolina to prove that our fathers then thought that probably slavery would be abolished by each state acting for itself before this time. Suppose they did. Suppose they did not foresee what has occurred. Does that change the principles of our government? They did not probably foresee the telegraph that transmits intelligence by lightning, nor did they foresee the railroads that now form the bonds of union between the different states, or the 1,000 mechanical inventions that have elevated mankind. But do these things change the principles of the government? Our fathers, I say, made this government on the principle of the right of each state to do as it pleases in its own domestic affairs, subject to the Constitution, and allowed the people of each to apply to every new change of circumstances such remedy as they may see fit to improve their condition. This right they have for all time to come. Mr. Lincoln went on to tell you that he does not at all desire to interfere with slavery in the states where it exists, nor does his party. I expected him to say that down here. Let me ask him then, how he expects to put slavery in the course of ultimate extinction everywhere if he does not intend to interfere with it in the states where it exists. He says that he will prohibit it in all territories, and the inference is, then, that unless they make free states out of them, he will keep them out of the Union. For, mark you, he did not say whether or not he would vote to admit Kansas with slavery or not, as her people might apply. He forgot that as usual, etc. He did not say whether or not he was in favor of bringing the territories now in existence into the Union on the principle of Clay's compromise measures on the slavery question. I told you that he wouldn't. His idea is that he will prohibit slavery in all the territories and thus force them all to become free states, surrounding the slave states with a cordon of free states and hemming them in, keeping the slaves confined to their present limits whilst they go on multiplying until the soil on which they live will no longer feed them, and he will thus be able to put slavery in a course of ultimate extinction by starvation. He will extinguish slavery in the southern states as the French general exterminated the Algerines when he smoked them out. He is going to extinguish slavery by surrounding the slave states, hemming in the slaves, and starving them out of existence as you smoke a fox out of his hole. He intends to do that in the name of humanity and Christianity, in order that we may get rid of the terrible crime and sin entailed upon our fathers upholding slaves. Mr. Lincoln makes out that line of policy and appeals to the moral sense of justice and to the Christian feeling of the community to sustain him. He says that any man who holds to the contrary doctrine is in the position of the king who claimed to govern by divine right. Let us examine for a moment and see what principle it was that overthrew the divine right of George III to govern us. Did not these colonies rebel against because the British Parliament had no right to pass laws concerning our property and domestic and private institutions without our consent? We demanded that the British government should not pass such laws unless they gave us representation in the body passing them. And this the British government insisting on doing, we went to war on the principle that the home government should not control and govern distant colonies without giving them a representation. Now, Mr. Lincoln proposes to govern the territories without giving them a representation and calls on Congress to pass laws controlling their property and domestic concerns without their consent and against their will. Thus, he asserts for his party the identical principle asserted by George III and the Tories of the Revolution. My friends, if, as I have said before, we will only live up to this great fundamental principle, there will be peace between the North and the South. Mr. Lincoln admits that, under the Constitution, on all domestic questions, except slavery, we ought not to interfere with the people of each state. What right have we to interfere with slavery any more than we have to interfere with any other question? He says that this slavery question is now the bone of contention. Why? Simply because agitators have combined in all the free states to make war upon it. Suppose the agitators in the states should combine in one half of the Union to make war upon the railroad system of the other half. They would thus be driven to the same sectional strife. Suppose one section makes war upon any other peculiar institution of the opposite section, and the same strife is produced. The only remedy and safety is that we shall stand by the Constitution as our fathers made it, obey the laws as they are passed, while they stand the proper test, and sustain the decisions of the Supreme Court and the constituted authorities. That is all to be said in the seventh and final debate. If you have any questions about what was said in the seventh debate, questions about what was said in the preceding debates, or maybe there's a legal topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to equip you with the necessary skills and information such as this to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. Hope you'll have a wonderful day, and until I see y'all in the next lecture for the next topic, I bid you all farewell.